The morning they tried to evict me from my own wedding gift started like any other quiet day on the ranch. I was sitting at my old pine kitchen table, the one Harold and I bought secondhand our first year of marriage. The varnish had worn off where his elbows used to rest, and there was a knife groove near the edge from the time he'd sliced bread too close to the wood. Sunlight came in thin through the east window, catching the steam rising from my mug of tea. The kettle still rattled a little as it cooled on the stove, and the only sounds were the ticking clock and the soft hum of the refrigerator. For a brief, foolish moment, I let myself pretend life was still the way it had been before Harold's heart decided it had done enough beating. Just an old woman, her tea, and the land. Then someone pounded on the front door like they were trying to break it off its hinges. The noise jolted through the whole house, sloshing tea onto the saucer. My first thought was that something had happened to a neighbor. Or maybe one of the heifers had gotten out and a passerby had come to tell me. Out here, knocks like that usually meant trouble. I pushed my chair back slowly, my knees reminding me I wasn't 30 anymore. The second round of knocking came before I made it halfway down the hall. "I'm coming," I called, though my voice didn't sound as steady as I wanted it to. When I opened the door, the cold hit my bare ankles first. Then I saw what the wind had blown in. Lena stood on my porch in a cream coat that probably cost more than my truck is worth. Her hair was scraped back into one of those shiny buns, not a strand out of place, and her lipstick matched the red soles of her high heels. Behind her stood a short man in a shiny gray suit carrying a leather portfolio, and another with a metal briefcase and a small stamp kit. The second man had that look I've seen on notaries and orderlies my whole life, detached, mildly bored, like he'd already decided what I was. "Martha," Lena trilled, stepping forward as if she might hug me. Her perfume hit me before she did, something floral and expensive that didn't belong on my porch boards. "Good morning. We were just in the area and thought we'd drop by and help you with some paperwork." I glanced at the cheap suit, at the metal briefcase. Something in my gut went cold. "In the area," I repeated. "We're 20 miles from town, dear. Nothing is ever just in the area out here." She laughed, a bright little sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, you know what I mean. May we come in? It's freezing." Without waiting for my answer, she pushed past me, heels clicking on my worn linoleum. The two men followed, careful not to brush against anything, like my house might stain them. "Why don't we sit at the table?" Lena said, heading straight for the kitchen like she owned the place. "This won't take long." My heart was already starting to thud, but my face stayed as still as the photo of Harold on the wall. I closed the door gently, locked it out of habit, and followed. Lena had taken my usual chair, the one facing the window. She'd laid a manila folder on the table, along with a glossy brochure showing an elderly couple holding hands on a walking path. The cheap suit man dropped his portfolio beside it. The notary set his briefcase down and began unpacking his little stamp and journal, movement smooth from repetition. "Now," Lena began, folding her hands on the folder, "I know this may feel a little overwhelming, but we've been talking, Evan and I, and we've decided it's time to streamline things. Make this place finally pay for itself, you know." "This place," I echoed. The kettle on the stove let out a tiny, protesting ping as it cooled. "The ranch," she said like I was slow. "The property. It's an incredible asset, Martha. Prime land. But having you rattling around out here alone, it's a liability, for you and for us." The word stuck in my ear. Liability. I'd been a lot of things in my life. Wife, mother, ranch hand, bookkeeper. Liability was a new one. "I've been doing just fine here," I said. 40 years, no major disasters." Lena tilted her head, all sympathy and teeth. "Except that fall you had last month. Evan told me. You hit your head, remember? And your hands shake sometimes. It's not safe. We just can't have you out here isolated. We'd never forgive ourselves if something happened." My fingers tightened around the edge of the table. That fall had been me tripping over a loose bootlace in the mud, sitting down hard, then laughing alone in the yard. I'd told my son about it on the phone offhand, not thinking it would be ammunition. The cheap suit man cleared his throat. "Mrs. Bennett, my name is Kyle Rogers. I'm a relocation consultant. Your daughter-in-law engaged my services to help transition you into a higher level of care and free up equity in the property." The notary laid a stack of papers on the table. The top page had a big bold heading, Occupancy Transfer and Care Arrangement. Underneath, in smaller, more dangerous print, were phrases my old eyes still knew how to find. Release of dower and homestead rights. I read silently. Voluntary vacation of property. Assignment of benefits. An eviction disguised as a hug. Lena slid the brochure toward me with 2 fingers. We've found you a beautiful assisted living place in town. Indoor pool activities, a whole wellness program. This, she tapped the papers, just makes the transition smooth. We'll handle everything. You won't have to worry about bills or repairs or any of this. She waved a manicured hand, taking in my kitchen, my house, my life. Mess anymore. My hands trembled as I picked up the first page, and for once I was grateful my age gave me that cover. On the inside, though, my thoughts were as sharp as barbed wire. They weren't sending me to a beautiful place. I knew that facility. Harold and I had donated blankets there years ago. It was state-run, understaffed, the kind of place people went when no one wanted them. Accepts Medicaid. Social Security assignment. The brochure's fine print said. I had read contracts longer than some of these people had been alive. I knew a dump when I smelled one. I also knew something Lena did not. Harold's old lawyer's letterhead flickered across my memory. Harold's voice in the office that last year. Martha, I'm putting the ranch into a trust. You will be trustee. Our boy, well, he'll get what he earns. They thought this house, this land, defaulted to Evan. They thought I was a sentimental squatter on my own property. Now, Martha, Lena cooed, pushing a pen toward me. You've been through so much since Harold passed. Let us take this burden off you. Just sign here, and we'll handle the rest. I let my eyes go a little unfocused. Let my mouth hang open just enough. I am not sure I understand all this, dear, I murmured. My son said. Add his name, she pounced. Oh, Evan? Of course. Here, let's get him on the phone. He's all for this. He's so worried about you. She pulled out her shiny phone, tapped a few times, then hit speaker. It rang twice. Hey, babe, came my son's voice, slightly tinny. I hadn't heard him call me that warmly in months. Hi, sweetie, Lena sang. We're here with your mom. Got the paperwork all ready for the transition. She's just a little hesitant. Want to reassure her? There was a pause. I imagined him at his office, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Mom, he said. You there? I'm here? I said. It's okay, he rushed on. Just sign it. Lena's handling everything. You'll be better off, trust me. That house is too much for you now. This is just logistics. Don't make this difficult. The last sentence slipped out sharper than he meant, I think. But it landed like a slap all the same. I looked at the chipped rim of my mug. That boy had taken his first steps on this kitchen floor. I'd bandaged his knees at this very table. Now he was telling me I was in the way. All right, honey, Lena said briskly. We'll call you when it's done. Love you. She hung up before I could answer. My heart cracked then, but only on the inside. On the outside, I blinked and let my hand shake a little more. I can't seem to read this without my glasses, I said, frowning at the page. Eyes aren't what they used to be. Let me just fetch them from the bedroom. Lena's smile tightened. We really are on a schedule, Martha. The notary bills by the hour, and we've got investors coming to look at the property next weekend. It would help all of us if you didn't drag this out. Investors. There it was, said out loud. I won't be but a minute, I said, already pushing my chair back. These old eyes. I'd hate to sign something I don't see proper. She exhaled sharply through her nose but forced another smile. Fine. 1 minute. I walked down the hall slower than I wanted, feeling their eyes on my back. When I reached my bedroom, I closed the door, turned the old key in the lock, and let my shoulders drop. For a second, I just stood there, listening to my own breath, to the muffled murmur of voices in my kitchen. Then I knelt down beside the bed, ignoring the protest from my knees, and reached under for the tin box Harold had painted green 30 years ago. The key was on a thin chain around my neck. I'd worn it every day since the funeral. The lock clicked open, a small, defiant sound. Inside, beneath a bundle of old photographs and Harold's will, lay the thick packet of papers Ms. Klein had given us. Harold Bennett Family Trust, the letterhead read. Trustee Martha Bennett, my name, not Evans, not Lena's. I ran my fingers along the embossed seal, remembering Harold squeezing my hand in that office. If I go first, he'd said, I want you safe. I want this land in hands that love it, not flip it. If you hadn't done this, I whispered now, I'd be on the curb already. Harold. I slid the papers back into their place, closed the lid, and pushed the box under the bed again. My glasses were on the nightstand, right where I'd left them, but I picked them up for show. When I walked back into the kitchen, Lena was checking her watch, the notary was staring at my curtains, the consultant was pretending not to snoop at my family photos. Finally, Lena said, All right, let's just. I won't be signing anything today, I said, setting my glasses gently on the table without putting them on. She blinked. Excuse me. I appreciate the thought. I went on, voice steady now. But Harold's things are still in this house. Our bedroom, the office, the attic. I've lived my whole adult life under this roof. I'm not going to disappear in an afternoon because it's convenient for your schedule. Her cheeks flushed a blotchy pink. Martha, this isn't about convenience. This is about your safety. I'm sure it is, I said calmly. Which is why I'll start sorting through his belongings today. I'll need a week. 7 days to pack what matters and say goodbye properly. After that, we can talk about your arrangements. The room went quiet except for the ticking clock. A week, she repeated slowly. The consultant shifted his weight. Our client did block out this coming weekend for an initial site visit, he muttered. Lena's jaw clenched. I watched the fight go on behind her eyes. Hurry me now and risk I dig my heels in. Or humor me and keep the fa-8 of loving daughter-in-law a little longer. 1 week, she said at last, voice clipped. Exactly 7 days, Martha. The investors are coming next Saturday morning. We need the house presentable. Then we're agreed, I said. She snatched the papers back into the folder with more force than necessary and stood. The notary packed up his seal. The consultant buttoned his jacket. On their way to the door, Lena paused and looked back over her shoulder. We're doing this for you, she said. Try to remember that. I will, I said. I watched from the doorway as they walked across the yard to their shiny SUV, heels slipping slightly on the gravel. The wind tugged at Lena's perfect hair. She didn't look back again. When the engine noise faded down the long drive, the ranch was quiet once more. The horses in the north pasture lifted their heads, then went back to grazing. A hawk circled over the far hill. Somewhere under the floorboards, the boiler kicked on with a familiar sigh. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around my shoulders and looked out over the land Harold and I had bled for. They thought they were shoving a helpless widow off. Their property. They thought a week was a kindness. They just gave you 7 days, old girl, I murmured to myself. 7 days to get ready. They had no idea whose name was really on this dirt. After they drove off, I stood in the doorway until the dust settled back into the ruts of the lane. The house felt hollow for a moment, like someone had opened all the windows and let something important blow away. I shut the door, slid the bolt, and walked into the living room. The old mantel over the fireplace sagged a little in the middle, just like Harold's back had started to do in his 60s, stubborn as he was about lifting hay bales himself. Above it hung the photo I always come back to when I need to remember who we were. I reached up and straightened the frame out of habit. In it, Harold and I are about 30. He's got a hammer in one hand, his other arm slung around my shoulders, and I'm laughing at something he's just said. Behind us is the barn, half-framed, the skeleton of the roof reaching toward a sky that looks impossibly blue. We were all sharp angles and hope back then. We bought this place for almost nothing. 40 acres of scrub and rock, no barn, no house, just an old windmill and a collapsed shed. The banker looked at us like we were out of our minds, signing papers for land nobody wanted. You sure about this, Harold? He'd said. Nothing out there but weeds and wind. Harold had just grinned, that sideways grin that showed the chip in his front tooth. Weeds can be grazed, he replied. One can be fenced. Land doesn't stay nothing if you're willing to bleed for it. The first winter we did bleed for it. Harold worked nights at the mill 3 towns over, and I took in mending for half the women at church. By day we hauled lumber, set fence posts, and learned the hard way how to pull a breeched calf at 2 in the morning when the vet couldn't get through a snowstorm. We sat at that same pine table, younger and bonnier, with our hands wrapped around coffee instead of tea. We'd spread out the feed invoices and electric bills and count pennies together. If we skip paying ourselves, I'd say, tapping the numbers, we can afford the new seed and maybe fix that leak in the roof. Harold would chuckle. Who needs pay when you've got a woman who can cook beans 6 different ways, huh? Little by little, the scrub turned to pasture. We planted a windbreak of poplars ourselves, saplings no taller than my knee. A used single-wide trailer turned into a small house. Then the barn went up, one stubborn board at a time. I learned to mend fence, to set a broken leg on a yearling, to tell from the way a cow flicked her tail whether a storm was coming. And then came Evan. We hadn't been sure we'd get a child. The doctor had used words like difficult and unlikely, and I'd made my peace with being the aunt who spoiled everyone else's kids. Then one August afternoon I found myself dizzy in the kitchen, and Harold drove like a madman to town, hammering on the clinic door until the nurse opened up. Evan was small and loud and perfect. He took his first steps right there on the faded rug between the sink and the stove, grabbing handfuls of my skirt for balance. By the time he was 5, he knew the names of every cow in the south pasture. But he never reached for the hay bales the way Harold had as a boy. His hands always gravitated to books, to the old computer a neighbor's grandson had outgrown. Sensitive, that one, the ladies at church would say, watching him sit on the steps with a paperback instead of running wild in the yard. Smart as a whip, we encouraged it. Harold may have come from a line of dirt farmers, but he didn't have romantic notions about it. If he wants to wear a tie instead of boots, let him. He'd tell me when I fretted. We'll break our backs so he doesn't have to. Still, there were moments, little warnings I tucked away and pretended not to see. The first time was when he was about 13. I picked him up from school in our old truck. The blue paint faded to almost gray. The passenger door you had to lift just so to close. 2 girls from his class were standing by the entrance. Evan froze when he saw them, then hunched down in the seat like he wished he could vanish. Drive, he hissed. Hurry. On the way home he wouldn't meet my eyes. Finally, in the driveway, he exploded. Why can't you get a normal car? He snapped. Everybody else's parents drive something that doesn't look like junk. I opened my mouth to remind him that the truck hauled feed and tools and half the lumber we ever used. But the words died when I saw the red on his cheeks, the shame that didn't belong to him but sat on him anyway. Years later, he knocked over a pail in the mud and stepped back, glaring at the mess like it had insulted him. I'm not staying on this dying dirt farm forever, he'd said, kicking at the ground. You two can rot out here if you want. I'm going to live in the real world. The real world, apparently, had no manure and no parents in thrift store flannel. Harold laughed it off in the moment, but that night in the barn, with just the sound of the cattle chewing, he turned serious. He's soft, he said quietly, running a hand down the flank of a black Angus. Too easy to embarrass. Kids like him, they get led around by the nose if they're not careful. Led by who? I asked, stroking the velvety nose of the cow, nudging my pocket for grain. People who talk fast and shine bright, he said. Folks who see land and think price per acre, not fence line and feed costs. It was a long time before I understood how right he was. When Harold's heart started acting up in his late 60s, it felt like betrayal. He'd always been the strong one, the one who could lift both ends of a feed sack if he wanted to show off. Sitting in the cardiologist's office, hearing words like congestive failure and reduced function, I watched his jaw clench as if he could muscle his way out of it. One damp spring afternoon, he asked Miss Klein to drive out from town. She'd handled our taxes and the purchase of this place, a sharp-eyed woman with gray streaks at her temples and a briefcase that always seemed too heavy for her thin arms. We sat in the little office Harold had carved out of one corner of the living room. The walls were lined with ledgers and old agricultural journals. Through the window, you could see the south pasture and the faint silver line of the creek. Martha, Miss Klein said, sliding a document toward me. What Harold is proposing is a revocable living trust. The ranch, house, land, outbuildings, goes into the trust. You are named as sole trustee. On his death, there's no probate. You keep control. Your son cannot sell what he does not own. I traced the letters with one finger. Harold watched my face. Seems sneaky, I said. Like we're cutting Evan out. We're not cutting him out, Harold said, putting his hand over mine. His skin felt thinner than it used to, but his grip was still firm. We're protecting what we built. He gets a cash bequest when I go. Enough for a good cushion. If he comes back to this land, it better be for the soil, not for a sale. Ms. Klein nodded. There's also a clause here. She pointed. That allows you, Martha, to add him as a beneficiary later if you decide he's ready. Ready for what? I'd asked. Harold looked out the window at the barn. Ready to see this place as more than a check. He said softly. I signed where they asked me to. The pen felt heavy in my hand, like a branding iron. At the time, all I cared about was that if something happened to Harold, I wouldn't have to fight in some courthouse with a judge who'd never had hay under his nails. When the end came, it was quieter than either of us expected. No dramatic clutching of the chest in the field, just a slow dwindling, like the way a creek dries to a trickle in August. He lay in our bed, the headboard Harold had carved himself framed by the yellowed wallpaper we never got around to replacing. I sat beside him, our fingers laced, listening to the oxygen machine's steady hiss. The house smelled of antiseptic and the stew I'd let burn on the stove. You'll protect the ranch, he whispered at one point, turning his head toward me. And you'll give Evan a chance. When he's ready, not before. Tears had blurred my vision then. I kissed his knuckles, the ones forever scarred from stubborn nails and barbed wire. I promise, I said. I'll keep it safe. And I'll keep the door open for him if he ever walks back through it like a man. After the funeral, when the last casserole dish had been picked up and the sympathy cards stopped coming, Evan showed up for a weekend. He walked the fence line once with me, more out of obligation than interest, then spent the rest of the time on his phone, taking calls from clients in the city. He brought a girl with him that second visit, Lena. She stepped out of the car like the gravel offended her, tottering in shoes that sank into the mud with every step. This is quaint, she'd said, looking up at the house with a little smile that never quite reached her eyes. So much potential. She asked questions, but not the kind I was used to. Not about how many head we ran or what the yield was on the hay field, but about acreage, zoning, road access. She talked about a friend who flipped old farmhouses for weekenders from the city, how there was real money in reinventing spaces. Even laughed at her jokes. When I offered coffee in my chip mugs, she accepted, then set hers down after one sip and never touched it again. Over the next few years, my boys' calls changed. They got shorter, more rushed. He told me about promotions and start-ups and opportunities. But half the time, the conversations ended with, Mom, could you spot me a little until this deal closes? I dipped into my own small savings, into the proceeds from a good calf crop, to help him cover a rent payment, a car repair, a credit card bill that had grown teeth. Each time, I told myself I was just helping him get started. Same as Harold and I once needed help with a down payment on seed. Parents are supposed to make life easier for their kids. I'd say into the empty kitchen after hanging up. That's the point. Somewhere in there, Lena's presence solidified. She started answering his phone when I called. He's in a meeting, she'd say. We're just really slammed right now, Martha. City life, you know. The first time she came out here alone with him, she walked straight to the back porch and took a dozen photos of the view. This is the vibe everyone wants now, she mused. Rustic chic. Wedding venues are gold mines. You could charge a fortune. Have you ever thought about repurposing? I'd felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. We've always thought of this as a ranch, I'd said, not a backdrop. It was Lena's idea to have the wedding here. For the rustic photos, she told me on the phone, excitement bubbling. The city folks will die over it. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to protect the house from strangers' shoes and laughter that didn't remember Harold. Part of me wanted to see my son say his vows under the cottonwoods we'd planted when he was born. In the end, when she chirped, "Well, handle everything, Martha. You just relax and enjoy the day," I caved the way I so often had with Evan. I didn't tell them about the trust. I didn't say a word about Miss Klein or Harold's careful clauses. I told myself the wedding day should be about love and hope, not paperwork and inheritance. Looking back, standing there by the mantel with Harold's younger face smiling down at me, I wondered if my silence that day hadn't paved the road for what was happening now. My knees cracked as I lowered myself to the armchair by the fireplace. The house was quiet except for the clock and the faint hum of the fridge. I reached for the folder I'd brought out from under the bed earlier and opened it on my lap. The trust documents sat there, thick and solid. My name clear as day, next to the words, Sole Trustee. Below them, though, another sheet caught my eye. Thinner paper, different letterhead. An old unsigned power of attorney form Ms. Klein had drafted years ago, just in case. Harold had said then. I ran my thumb along the blank line where my name should have been. We'd never signed it. At the time, it felt like tempting fate. Maybe I raised this storm by keeping too many things quiet, I murmured. But this silence, Harold, this silence you gave me, it might be the only shield I've got left. I closed the folder gently, the unsigned form tucked on top now, and my mind drifted, unwillingly, back to the day of the wedding. Back to Lena's laughter, to the music on the lawn, to the moment I first saw clearly that my son's bride didn't just want his heart. She wanted the land under his feet. The day my son's bride sat me by the trash cans was supposed to be the happiest day this ranch had seen since Harold, and I first drove a post into the ground. The East Meadow had never looked so dressed up. That was where we'd held church picnics and 4th of July potlucks for years. Blankets laid right over the clover. Now it was covered with white tents and rows of rented chairs, all lined up toward an arch that framed the cottonwoods and the far hills. Someone had strung fairy lights from pole to pole, and the breeze made them sway like stars that hadn't decided where to settle yet. I stood at the edge of it all in my best dress, which wasn't saying much by city standards, but meant something to me. Navy blue with tiny white flowers, bought 20 years ago for our church's 50th anniversary celebration. I'd let it out a bit at the seams since then, but it still fit. Around my neck I wore the locket Harold gave me on our 10th anniversary. A tiny pressed forget me, not inside. My old leather handbag hung from my arm, its handle worn smooth from the years. For a moment, I let myself feel proud. Not of the tents or the fancy cutlery I hadn't rented, but of the land itself. The grass under those high heels and polished shoes I had seeded. The windbreak shielding the tents from the northerly gusts, Harold and I had planted as saplings with blisters on our hands. Mum. Evan called, jogging up in his suit. The tie I'd helped him pick out crooked already. He kissed my cheek quickly, the way a man kisses his mother when he's got a lot on his mind and very little time. You look great. So do you, I said, and I meant it. He looked older in that suit, like the boy who used to trail behind Harold with a toy hammer had finally grown into his shoulders. I've got to go check on the sound system, he said, already backing away. Just find your seat. Lena had them arranged just so. I nodded. Mother of the groom. I figured my seat would be near the head table, where it usually is. Near enough to see his face when he made promises he believed in, at least for today. Near the entrance of the big tent, someone had set up a tall easel with a painted seating chart. The board was covered in calligraphy and tiny watercolor flowers, the kind of thing Pinterest probably told Lena people needed now. I stepped closer, squinting a little to find my name. I saw Mr. and Mrs. Pollard, Table 1. That was Lena's parents' names in bold, right under the heading, Family. There were her cousins, her aunt, her college roommate, all clustered around the front. I scanned for Martha Bennett. It wasn't there. I thought maybe I'd missed it. My eyes aren't what they used to be. I started again from the top, going line by line. There, near the bottom, under a different heading in smaller script. Vendors and staff, Table 14, Martha Bennett. A Table 14 was noted with a tiny arrow, near catering tent. For a moment, I just stared at it. The letters swam a little. Surely it was a mistake. Mother of the groom doesn't sit with the people hired by the hour. I'd fed half the folks who would be here today out of my own kitchen at one time or another. Found your name. A voice asked at my shoulder. Lena appeared, all lace and diamonds, her bridal gown fanning out behind her like a cloud. She smelled like some kind of vanilla flower, too sweet for the open air. I think there's been a mix-up, I said slowly. It says I'm at Table 14 with the vendors. She leaned in, eyes skimming the board. Oh, yes, She smiled, quick and bright. "We thought you'd be more comfortable with the folks you know." "You know the help?" My ears rang. "The help?" I repeated. She looked me up and down in one swift, assessing glance. "Your dress is nice," she said, drawing the word out. "A bit dark, don't you think? Kind of funeral-ish. The photographers are trying for a certain aesthetic. We don't want the front of the tent to look too cluttered." She dropped her voice on that last word and leaned closer. "We just can't have the pictures look cluttered with, older people in the front. Sponsors and investors need to see themselves." Behind her, two women in pale pastel dresses watched us with that awkward half-interest people get when they sense drama, but don't know whose side to be on. One of them glanced at my handbag like it might drip on the floor. "I thought I'd be sitting near Evan," I said, my voice coming out thinner than I'd hoped.
"Oh, sweetie!"
Lena laughed softly. "You'll see him plenty. He'll make the rounds after dinner. Besides, you love talking to the caterers and the band, right? They're your people. We put you where you'd be happiest." She placed one manicured hand briefly on my arm, the gesture all performance, then floated away toward the head table, where her parents were already settling into their seats, her mother's necklace throwing prisms across the linen. I stood there like someone had nailed my boots to the ground. Across the tent, Evan looked up from a cluster of his old college friends. Our eyes met. He saw me, saw the board, saw where my finger rested. I watched the flicker of discomfort cross his face. He opened his mouth, took one step like he might come over. Then Lena touched his sleeve, said something in his ear, and he turned away. Laughter rose from the group around him. Too loud, too fast. "It's just a seat," I told myself. "Don't make a scene." That's what he would say. I followed the little arrow at the bottom of the chart. Table 14 was at the far edge of the tent, half under the canvas, half out in the open, wedged between the catering tent and the row of gray plastic trash cans. The wind swung one of the lids a little, and every time it banged, the smell of stale beer and vegetable peels drifted over. A couple of young servers in black aprons stood nearby, checking their phones. An older man from town who'd been hired to do the music nodded politely when he saw me. "Afternoon, Mrs. Bennett," he said. "Heard they've got you back here slumming with us." I managed a smile and pulled out a chair. The white cushion was already stained with something reddish-brown. Maybe barbecue sauce. Maybe wine. I set my handbag down and sat. From where I was, the view of the head table was mostly the backs of people's heads and the flapping tent wall. But I could see enough to watch Lena's mother dabbing, happy tears, at the corner of her eyes with a linen napkin while my son poured her champagne. I sat there long enough for one server to ask if I wanted water. My throat felt tight, but I shook my head. I refused to eat beside the trash at my own husband's land. Slowly, carefully, I stood back up, picked up my bag, and walked away from table 14. No scene, no dramatics. Just an old woman needing some air. The barn was quieter. They'd strung lights along the rafters in there too, planning to use it for dancing later. But for the moment it was mostly empty. Dust motes turned in the beams of sunlight coming through the high windows. The smell of hay and oil and old wood wrapped around me like a blanket. I walked down the central aisle, running my fingers along the familiar rails of the stalls. Bessie, our oldest cow, grunted softly from her corner, unimpressed with all the fuss outside. "Me too, girl," I murmured, scratching her between the ears. "Me too." Voices floated in from the far end, where the little tack room opened onto the back of the barn. I was about to call hello when a name made me freeze. "Apex will love this," a man said, his voice smooth and confident. 9-hole resort course, right through that valley. You flatten this grade here, put the clubhouse on that rise. Spectacular. I moved closer, keeping to the shadows behind a stack of hay bales. Lena stood near the open back door with two men in pressed golf shirts and shiny loafers. One of them held a set of glossy drawings, aerial views of my land with colored fairways sketched across it like someone had scrawled over a child's face. "And the existing structures?" the other man asked, flicking his pen toward a little square labeled, "Residence." "Oh, we'd demo all of that," Lena said breezily. "Tear down the old house, the barn, all the outbuildings. Clean slate. Once Evan inherits, the paperwork will be quick. His mom can't stay here much longer anyway." My hand tightened on the hay so hard a stalk broke under my palm. She understands that, right? The first man asked. We can't have holdouts. Lena made a face. She's sentimental, but she's 72. We're already talking to a care facility. Honestly, it'll be better for everyone. And once we show Apex we're serious about development. She smiled. The land value triples. Trust me. Trust me. That's what she'd said when she asked to host the wedding here. When she'd talked about honoring Harold's memory with lanterns and photos and a slideshow. She wasn't just marrying my son. She was marrying the land she thought he'd inherit. I stepped back. My heart thudding so loud I was afraid they'd hear it. The hay pricked my palm, grounding me in the moment. I wanted to storm out there, grab those papers, and tear them in half. To shout that this land wasn't theirs to carve up like a roast. Instead, I turned around and walked silently out the side door, boots crunching on the gravel. The sky outside was too blue, too bright. Laughter and music floated from the meadow, a world away from the conversation in the barn. I didn't have to wait long for Evan to find me. He came in, tie loosened, cheeks flushed from heat and champagne. Mom, there you are, he said. I've been looking for you. You disappeared. I was standing by Harold's old workbench, my hand on the scarred wood where he'd once carved his initials by accident. I turned slowly. I found my seat, I said. He winced. Yeah, about that. Look, I'm sorry, okay? Lena was worried about optics with investors. It's complicated. We had to put sponsors and her parents up front. You know how these things are. No, I said quietly. I don't. He rubbed the back of his neck, not meeting my eyes. It's just a seat. Don't make a scene, Mom. Please, not today. There it was, laid bare. I swallowed. Is that what this is now? Optics and investors. He glanced toward the sound of music. It's more than just a party, all right? This could be big for us. For the ranch. For the ranch, I repeated. He nodded, seizing the opening. Yeah, speaking of, by the way, Mom, did Dad ever update the deed? Lena's been talking to a mortgage broker about maybe leveraging some of the equity to do improvements. There's paperwork they need. She said something about clear title. My lips went dry. Your father always handled that sort of thing, I said, letting my shoulders sag a bit. I never understood those papers. Just signed where they told me. I wouldn't know what you're looking for. He frowned slightly, like a man trying to remember where he left his keys. Well, we'll figure it out, he said. Lena's on top of it. I looked at my son, the boy who'd once fallen asleep in a hayloft with straw in his hair and mud on his boots. Now talking about leveraging and equity like this place was just another line on a spreadsheet. I asked. He missed the edge in my voice. Yeah.
Oh, and one more thing,
he added, already halfway turned toward the door. Lena was hoping we could use the master bedroom tonight for, photos and stuff. Bridal suit vibes. It has the best light. You could sleep in the small guest room, right? Just for tonight. The master bedroom. The room where Harold had drawn his last breath. Where we'd whispered in the dark about worries we never shared with anyone else. The room that still held his dent in the mattress. I stared at him so long he finally shifted from one foot to the other. Just for tonight, he repeated quickly. It would mean a lot to her. That was the moment right there. The line I felt, clear as a barbed wire fence in my chest. Of course, I said after a beat, my voice calm. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the heavy ring of keys. I slid the house key off and held it out to him. You're the groom. It's your big day. Relief washed over his face. He took the key, grinning. You're the best, Mom. Really, we'll make it up to you. He didn't see how my hand lingered a second longer in the empty air. When he left, the barn felt colder somehow despite the summer heat. I leaned both hands on Harold's workbench and let myself feel it. The sting of being shuffled to the back, the press of Lena's plans like a boot on my neck, and the hollow where my son's backbone should have been. I could have stopped things that night. I could have pulled him aside, told him about the trust, about Ms. Klein, about the fact that the land he was mentally spending did not belong to him. Instead, I wiped my eyes on the back of my hand, straightened my dress, and walked out to the meadow when they called for family photos. I chose to watch, to see how far they would go. Now, months later, standing in my quiet kitchen with eviction papers still ghosting the table, my phone buzzed on the counter. A new message from Evan lit up the screen. Mom, Let Lena handle the move to the care home. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. I stared at the words until they blurred, then set the phone face down. Harder, I thought. He had no idea how hard this was about to get. I was 2 days into my promised week when the sound of a diesel engine shattered the morning. I woke with my heart pounding, the remnants of a dream about Harold fading as a heavy thump rattled the window. For a second I thought it was a delivery truck gone astray. Then I heard voices, strange men's voices, and the scrape of something big being dragged across my porch. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, joints protesting, and peered through the thin curtain. A moving truck sat in the driveway, its ramp already down, 2 men in matching T-shirts muscling dollies toward my front steps. On the porch, clipboard in hand, stood Lena. Even from here I could see the flash of her white teeth as she barked instructions, one manicured finger jabbing toward my front door. She didn't knock this time. She just opened the door like she had a key, which she did now, courtesy of my foolishness at the wedding, and called up the hall. "Martha, rise and shine." Big day. I was still in my nightgown when she appeared in the bedroom doorway, all brisk efficiency in a camel-colored coat and skinny jeans. Behind her, one of the movers hovered, cardboard boxes stacked in his arms. "What in the world?" I began. "Plans changed," she said brightly, booming over my question. "We found an opening at a wonderful facility in town. Private room, garden views, the whole 9 yards. You'll love it." I pushed myself up a little straighter. "You said I had a week," I reminded her. 7 days. She shrugged, already scanning the room like she was making a mental inventory. "Openings like this don't just sit around, Martha. We had to grab it. It's better this way, trust me." Like ripping off a bandage. She turned to the mover. "Start with the closet. Pack everything. Don't worry about sorting. We'll deal with it later." He stepped into my room as if it were a hotel suite someone had rented. His big hands went straight for Harold's side of the closet, wrenching hangers free in clumps. "Careful," I said sharply, but my voice was swallowed by the sound of tape being ripped off a roll in the hall. Another man passed by carrying my quilt chest like it was just another piece of freight. "Where's Evan?" I asked. Lena's expression didn't flicker. "He had an early meeting," she said. "He hates goodbyes. You know how sentimental he is. He thought it was better if I handled the logistics." The mover yanked Harold's old suit from the rod, buttons scraping the floor. A framed photo tumbled from the shelf above and hit the hardwood with a crack, the glass splintering over the image of Harold and Evan at the county fair, grinning over a blue ribbon steer. "Stop," I said, louder this time. The man froze, looking at Lena. "It's just a photo," she said, waving her hand. "We'll reprint it. Keep going." My hands were shaking now, from anger more than age. I took a deep breath and forced it down where it could turn into something useful. "Give me 10 minutes to get dressed," I said. "I won't be hauled out of here in my nightclothes like a sack of potatoes," Lena sighed, glancing at her watch. "Fine. 10 minutes. Take your toothbrush and whatever you need for a few days. They have laundry and everything else there. The guys will finish packing the rest." She spun on her heel and was gone, her voice drifting back down the hall. "Boxes from the dresser, too! And be careful with the mirrors. We're staging the house later." I closed the bedroom door, turned the lock. A useless little circle of metal with no power against dolly wheels and ambition, and sagged against it for a moment. Harold's side of the bed was already bare, the hollow where he'd lain now filled with folded moving blankets. I crossed to the closet, stepping around an open box where someone had tossed his military medals, loose, the ribbons tangling with a pair of his work gloves. One of the medals had a small nick in it now, where it had hit the edge. "I'm sorry, love," I whispered, picking it up. I should have seen this coming sooner. On the chair by the window sat the small suitcase I'd started half-heartedly packing when I thought I had a week. Now I went to it with purpose. I slipped my few clothes to one side and reached under the folded sweaters for the envelope with our trust documents and the old unsigned power of attorney. They slid into the bottom of the case with a satisfying weight. Next went my checkbook, my social security card, my passport, expired, but it had my maiden name and a younger face that still felt like me. I hesitated only a second before adding Harold's dog tags and one of his worn flannel shirts. If they were going to rip me from this house, they weren't getting everything. When I stepped back into the hall, dressed and carrying the suitcase, a stranger was in my bedroom, ripping my curtains off their rods. Another man hauled my nightstand down the hall, the lamp on it still plugged in, cord trailing like an umbilical. "Ready," Lena called from the kitchen, where she stood sipping coffee from my mug. "I suppose I don't have a choice," I said. "Oh, don't be dramatic," she said lightly. "You're going to love it. They have bingo nights and a beauty salon. It's basically a cruise ship on land." As she hustled me out the door between stacks of boxes, I caught one last glimpse of my living room. Harold's recliner was already wrapped in plastic, the Afghan my sister crocheted sliding to the floor, unnoticed. Evan's wedding photo sat on the mantel, still in its frame. For a fleeting second, I considered grabbing it. Then I thought of where he was, anywhere but here, and left it where it sat. The drive into town took 20 minutes we didn't fill with much. Lena had her Bluetooth in her ear, one hand on the wheel, the other shuffling papers on the console. "Yeah, if we can get surveyors in by Thursday," she said to whoever was on the line, "we can have preliminary reports for Apex by next week. The sooner we show them the site is clear, the faster we close. Yes, the house will be vacant. Trust me." I leaned my head against the cool window and closed my eyes, not to sleep but to listen. Left at the big cottonwood, past the old grain silo, right at the gas station with the broken sign. I counted the turns in my head, mapping the distance between my home and wherever she thought she was dropping me. "You okay back there?" She tossed over her shoulder once, the microphone on her cheek flashing blue. "Just tired," I murmured, letting my voice go small. "Change is hard at your age," she said almost kindly. "You'll adjust." The facility sat on the edge of town, a low, sprawling building with beige siding and small, identical windows. The sign out front had sun-faded letters, "Riverside Care Center, where seniors come first." One of the bulbs in the word, "first," had burned out, leaving it to blink weekly F-rest. Lena parked in the visitor lot and hopped out, all energy. I followed slower, suitcase wheels rattling over cracked pavement. The automatic doors sighed open, and a wave of smells hit me: bleach, boiled vegetables, something underneath it all that smelled like old pain. Inside, the lights were harsh fluorescent tubes buzzing faintly above scuffed linoleum. A frail man in a wheelchair dozed in the hallway, a thin blanket sliding off his knees. A nurse rushed past, a clipboard in one hand, her ponytail swinging, her eyes already somewhere else. "This is nice, isn't it?" Lena said, her voice bouncing off the sterile walls. "Look, they have a fish tank." At the reception desk, a tired-looking woman in scrubs glanced up from a stack of files. "Dropping off or visiting?" she asked. "Admitting," Lena said briskly. "Martha Bennett." We spoke on the phone. The woman rifled through a pile and pulled out a thick folder. "Right, room 12 shared. We'll just need you to fill out the intake packet. Medicare, Medicaid assignment, Social Security benefit transfer, you know the drill." She pushed a stack of forms across the counter, along with a pen already chewed at the end. The words swam for a second, but I caught enough. Assignment of monthly benefits. Authorized representative. Release of financial responsibility. Lena turned to me, hand outstretched. "Wallet, Martha," she said like she was asking for a tissue. "I'll take care of all this for you. It's too much for you to follow." My fingers clutched the handle of my suitcase. In that instant, more clear than anything I'd felt in days, I understood. If I handed over that worn leather, with my ID and cards and the last threads of my independence, I would stop being a person and become a patient. A file in a drawer. A bed in a room. I thought of Harold's signature on the trust papers. Of Ms. Klein's matter-of-fact voice saying, "Your son cannot sell what he does not own." Of Lena on the phone, promising a cleared site to out-of-town investors. My stomach twisted, but not from the car ride. I need the bathroom," I said, pressing a hand to my middle. "Oh Lord. That drive, I feel sick." The receptionist frowned. "Down the hall. Third door on the left," she said, pointing. "We'll need your information when you get back. Don't take forever," Lena added, already flipping the first page of the forms. "We've got a truck on the clock, remember." I shuffled away, hand on my lower back, playing the part I knew they saw. The hallway smelled even more strongly of disinfectant, a lemon scent that failed to cover the tang of urine. Residents' doors were half open, some revealing flickering televisions, others just a pair of eyes watching the world pass by. At the corner, just past the sign for the bathrooms, a red EX light glowed above a side door. A faded, alarm wheel sound, sticker peeled at one edge. I glanced back. From here I could see the reception desk. Lena's head was bent over the papers, her ponytail swishing as she wrote. The receptionist was on the phone now, one hand covering her ear. No one was looking at the hall. I straightened my back. The shuffle left my step. My heart hammered, but my hands were steady as I pushed the bar on the exit door. The alarm that sounded was less a siren, more a tired chirp. It warbled once, twice, then cut off. The door opened onto a narrow alley lined with dumpsters, the cold air slapping my cheeks awake. For the first time that day I breathed. I didn't run. 72-year-old knees don't take kindly to running. But I walked with purpose down that alley, around the corner, and onto the sidewalk. Cars whooshed past on the main road, drivers glancing at me once and then away. Just another old woman with a suitcase, too late for a bus. 3 blocks down was a little diner I knew, the kind of place that always smells like bacon and coffee, no matter the hour. I'd eaten pie there with Harold more times than I could count on trips into town. They still had a payphone on the wall near the bathrooms, a relic from another era that nobody bothered to remove. I slipped inside. The bell over the door jingling. A waitress glanced up, then back at the coffee she was pouring. I went straight to the phone, digging in my bag for quarters like I used to. Miss Klein's office number was still scrawled in the address book I carried, the pages soft from years of use. I dialed, the rotary wheel dragging my finger back each time. When her receptionist answered, I didn't bother with pleasantries. "This is Martha Bennett," I said. "Put her on. It's urgent." A moment later, that familiar clipped voice came on the line. "Martha, everything all right? They tried to dump me?" I said, keeping my voice low. "Loaded up my house, drove me to Riverside like a stray they were tired of feeding. It's time we show them who owns this place." There was a rustle of paper on her end, like she was already reaching for a file. "Where are you right now?" "At the diner on Main," I said. I walked out the side door. "They think I'm in a bathroom somewhere, I suppose." "Good," she said. "Listen carefully. First, you need somewhere they can't track you easily. There's a motor lodge out past the feed store, the Prairie Inn. They still take cash. Check in there under your maiden name if you can. Lay low. Second, any paperwork you saw at that facility. If you can get a look later, we'll need photos. And I'll start filing notices to freeze any attempts to alter the trust or assign your benefits without your consent." "How hard can we hit them?" I asked. The words surprised even me. "As hard as you're willing to go," she replied. "But before we do anything formal, Martha, we need proof. Text messages, recordings, documents. They won't just give up because we frown at them." I closed my eyes, picturing Lena at my kitchen table, sliding papers toward me like she was doing me a favor. Evan's text flashing on my phone, telling me not to make things harder. "I can get you proof," I said. "Then start by getting safe," she said. "Call me when you're at the motel. We'll take it from there." I hung up, the receiver landing on the cradle with a satisfying clack. My reflection in the dull metal of the phone looked older than I felt in that moment. Tired, yes, but not finished. The Prairie Inn was exactly as I remembered, a long, low strip of doors beneath a peeling sign. A soda machine humming in the corner, the smell of bleach barely masking stale smoke. The man at the desk barely glanced at my ID. "Cash only," he said. "Perfect," I replied, sliding bills across the counter. "One night, maybe more." Room 6 had a bedspread the color of old ketchup and a lamp that flickered when I turned it on. The carpet was thin in spots, threadbare paths worn between the door, the bed, and the bathroom. It was, in other words, exactly where someone like Lena would never think to look for me. I set my suitcase on the bed and unzipped it. The trust binder came out first, thick and solid, the embossed seal catching the weak lamplight. Beside it, I laid the unsigned power of attorney, its blank line a reminder of a choice we'd once made not to give anyone control over me too easily. "They think I'm staring at a white ceiling right now," I said into the empty room, imagining the fluorescent hum of Riverside. "They think I'm already filed away." I smoothed my hand over Harold's name on the top page. "Let them think it," I murmured. "For now." My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A new message from an unknown number blinked on the screen, a photo of the front of my house. Movers on the porch, captioned with a smiling emoji. No words. Just a picture sent by someone who believed the story was already over. I turned the phone face down, reached for my address book again, and dialed Ms. Klein back. "I'm safe," I said when she answered. "What's our next move?" Her voice was cool steel. "Before we strike, Martha, we need to see the whole battlefield. That means going back. Quietly. Are you willing to set foot on that ranch again without them knowing?" I looked at the thin wall of the motel room, could almost feel the land beyond it, patient under the sky. "I built that place," I said. "If anyone can walk it in the dark, it's me." "Then we begin," she said. Ms. Klein came to the Prairie Inn after dark, like we were doing something illegal instead of trying to keep my life from being stolen. Her sedan pulled into the parking lot without headlights until the last second. She parked 2 doors down from my room and walked over with her briefcase hugged close, her heels clicking on the concrete. In the thin light from the motel sign, she looked smaller than she did behind her big oak desk, but her eyes were just as sharp. "You picked a good place," she said when I opened the door. "No one I know would be caught dead here." "Figured that was the point," I replied, stepping aside to let her in. She set the briefcase on the wobbly table by the window and snapped it open. I expected stacks of paper, maybe a thick law book or two. Instead, she pulled out 2 small items that looked almost comical in her neat hands. A chunky black USB charger and something the size of a pack of gum with a tiny red light on one end. "What's all that?" I asked. "Insurance," she said, plugging the USB thing into the strip by the lamp. "This one's a Wi-Fi bug." She tapped it. "Looks like just another charger. Goes in a wall socket, joins whatever network is handy, and sends me whatever it hears." She held up the smaller device. "And this is an old-school voice recorder. Motion activated. Slips under a bowl, a cushion, a stack of mail." I stared at the gadgets, feeling a knot form in my stomach. "You want me to spy on my own son?" "I want you to protect yourself," she said evenly. "Martha, they tried to bury you in a state home and clear out your house behind your back. If they're talking about selling the ranch without you, we need it on tape." I sat down on the edge of the bed. The mattress sagged under me, the springs complaining. Spying was something I associated with crime shows and nosy neighbors, not mothers and kitchen tables. "I never even read Evan's diary when he was a boy," I said quietly. Felt wrong to peek at something that wasn't meant for my eyes. The Ms. Klein's mouth softened for half a second. Then it firmed again. "Your son is not a boy anymore," she replied. "He's a man making choices. Right now, those choices include letting his wife strip mine your life. You're not prying into teenage secrets, Martha. You're documenting a crime. There's a difference between curiosity and survival." I thought of Lena's hand held out for my wallet. Of Evan's text, asking me not to make things harder. Of Riverside's humming lights and the sound of that exit door closing behind me. "What exactly would you want me to do?" I asked. She pushed the USB charger across the table. "They've set up Evan's office in the old den, right? Plug this into the power strip behind his computer. It'll pick up any conversations in there." She handed me the recorder. "And tuck this under something in the kitchen. People say damning things near coffee." The idea of creeping through my own house like a thief made my throat tight. But so did the idea of that house with someone else's name on the mailbox. "They already decided who I am without asking," I said slowly. "Maybe it's time I see who they really are when they think I'm not listening." "That's the spirit," Ms. Klein said. "Get it planted tonight if you can. I'll be at my desk with my laptop. Once it's online, I can hear what you hear." We worked out details. How to park down the back road, where on the fence line the boards were loose enough for me to slip through, how to text her a simple and out, so she'd know I was safe without drawing attention. When she left, the motel room felt smaller, full of invisible lines stretching from that dingy lamp all the way back to my kitchen. Around 10, I pulled on my darkest sweater, the one Harold used to joke made me look like a cat burglar, and laced up my boots. The USB bug and recorder went into my pocket next to my old flip phone. I looked at myself in the mirror, a 72-year-old woman with tired eyes and new steel in her jaw. All right, Martha. I told my reflection. You've fixed fences in a hailstorm. You can sneak into your own house. The drive out to the ranch felt longer than usual. Every pair of headlights coming the other way made my grip tighten on the steering wheel. When I turned off onto the dirt road that skirted our back pasture, my heart knocked so hard it felt like it might bruise my ribs. I killed the engine near the grove of poplars Harold and I had planted. Let the night swallow the noise. The sky was a deep, endless black, pricked with stars. The farmhouse glow was a faint rectangle across the field, softened by distance. The fence on the north line had a weak spot where a storm had taken down a tree years ago. Harold had patched it temporarily, meaning to go back with new posts once calving season eased up. Like a lot of things, temporary turned into good enough. I walked along the fence until I found that familiar dip. The grass brushed my calves, cool and damp. Crickets chirped. From the direction of the house came a burst of laughter, muffled by closed windows. I slipped between the sagging wires, careful not to jangle them, and kept low, sticking to the shadows of the outbuildings until I reached the old equipment shed. Its side door had always stuck, except when you lifted it just so. I'd been the only one who knew that trick for years. The shed swallowed me up, its dark smelling of oil and dust and old hay twine. I waited a moment, letting my eyes adjust, then moved through the familiar clutter to the back where a narrow door led into the mudroom. Voices drifted faintly from the front of the house, music playing somewhere. I clicked the recorder on, slipped it into my pocket, and eased the door open. The house felt wrong. Some of the lamps were different, sleeker, colder. A print of abstract shapes hung where Harold's framed photo of the first prize bull used to be. But under it all, beneath the new things, it was still my house. My feet knew where the floorboard creaked, which drawer squeaked, which chair leg rattled. I moved first toward the den. Through the half-open door I saw the faint glow of a computer screen, blue against the dark. The power strip behind the desk was full of cords and chargers, a tangle of modern life. Hands steady, I crouched, unplugged one empty block, and slid Ms. Klein's USB charger into place. The little light on it flickered once, then settled. "All right, girl," I whispered under my breath. "Do your worst." In the kitchen, the overhead pendant light was on, casting a circle of brightness over the island. The copper pot Harold had hung years ago was gone, replaced by a sleek stainless steel fixture. On the counter sat a decorative ceramic bowl full of lemons that looked too perfect to be real. I clicked the recorder on, waited for the tiny red light, and slipped it beneath the bowl, tucking it against the lip so the motion sensor would catch anyone standing there. I had just stepped back when I heard the front door open and voices spill in. "How hard is it to keep track of one old woman?" Lena snapped. Her heels clicked sharply on the hardwood. "Riverside says she never checked in. Their paperwork's just sitting on the desk." My blood ran cold. I ducked into the pantry, pulling the door almost shut, leaving a sliver to see through. "Maybe she changed her mind," Even said, his voice thinner than I remembered. "Maybe she went back home." "We can still talk to her, explain." "Explain what?" Lena shot back, coming fully into view. She tossed a folder onto the island. It skidded to a stop inches from the bowl hiding my recorder. "That her nostalgia is standing in the way of 8 figures, Evan. That every day she insists on clinging to this drafty museum costs us money we don't have." She flipped the folder open. Even from my hiding spot, I could see glossy paper, bold letters, Lena McCoy Wellness and Golf Retreat. Not Carter McCoy. Her maiden name, clean and unencumbered. Avon hovered at the edge of the light, hands in his pockets. I don't want to send her to one of those places that smell like bleach and death," he said softly. Lena snorted. "Then don't visit," she said. "Problem solved." She jabbed a manicured fingernail at one of the pages. "Look, 9 whole course here, spy there, boutique hotel along the ridge. Apex eats this kind of thing up." But the mortgage broker was very clear. They'll only pre-approve if title is clean. That means no cranky old ladies with feelings about fence posts. She shuffled another set of papers out. "We've already put down deposits with the contractors. Non-refundable. Remember? And Franken-Phoenix wired his share into the LLC last week. He's expecting to flip his stake once we close with Apex. If this falls through, he's going to want his money back. Phoenix. LLC. Words stacked up in my mind like storm clouds. Even ran a hand through his hair, making it stick up. We shouldn't have moved so fast, he muttered. We're leveraged to the eyeballs. Lena, if something goes wrong. Something is going wrong, she snapped, slapping another document onto the pile. Your mother decided she knows better than us. She walked out of Riverside like she was checking out of a motel. Do you know how that makes me look? Like I can't even manage my own family. She pulled out a sheet with a letterhead I recognized from the clinic in town. What is that? Even asked warily. Plan B, she said. She held it up so he could see. The fluorescent light caught the embossed seal. Medical capacity statement, she read aloud. Signed by Dr. Lalonde, certifying that Martha Bennett is exhibiting early signs of dementia, compromised judgment, and is at risk of self-neglect. My hand flew to my mouth before I could stop it. I bit down on my knuckles to keep from making a sound. You forged that, Avon whispered. She rolled her eyes. Relax. Leland owes me. I got his wife that listing in the Heights, remember? He signed it. All very official. If your mom fights us, we submit this. Court sees a confused old woman sabotaging her own safety. We look like heroes. Guardianship, power of attorney, the whole package. She's still sharp, Lena, he said, sounding desperate. You know she is. Maybe we should just wait until I don't know. Until she's ready. Lena's laugh was short and ugly. We don't have time to wait, she said. The contractors want their second draws. The mortgage broker wants updated appraisals. Apex wants proof the site is clear. Until she's ready is not a business timeline. She stepped closer to him, jabbing his chest with her finger. You are so spineless sometimes, she hissed. Do you want this life or not? Do you want to stay chained to your mom's sagging porch, fixing broken fences for the rest of your days? Or do you want to live somewhere with a view that isn't cows? He flinched. Don't start. I will finish, she said coldly. Because if you don't get on board, if you don't help me get this done, do you know what happens when the bills come due? She gestured around. This house. It's in default because of the second mortgage we took out, the cards. Maxed. The LLC, undercapitalized. Frank and Phoenix. He'll sue. And all of it. Every last cent is in your name, not mine. I can walk. You can't. Ivan opened his mouth, then closed it. The color had drained from his face. The only thing that worries me, he said finally, is Dad's old lawyer, Klein. If she finds out about the deed. Lena waved a hand dismissively. I've looked through every file in that office. There's a will, it leaves everything to you. Deed with Harold and your mom's names on it, sure, but nothing else. No trust, no secret codicil. Klein's just some dusty attorney who did their taxes. If she starts sniffing around, we show her the medical statement and tell her to back off. You're sure? He asked. I am sure of one thing, she said. We are not letting your mother's stubbornness ruin this for us. Tomorrow you're going to call her. You're going to sound pitiful. You're going to tell her how stressed you are, how much you need her to sign one little paper to help with insurance. And she will sign, because that's what she does. She takes care of you, even when you don't deserve it. There was a long silence. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the wall clock. Finally, Evan said, so quietly I barely caught it. What if she doesn't? Then she dies broke in that house when the bank takes it, Lena said. And you go back to renting a one-bedroom over a laundromat. Is that what you want? His shoulders slumped. No, he whispered. Then grow up, she said. Get the signature. They stood there for another moment, both breathing hard. Then Lena gathered up the papers, tucking the forged statement back into the folder, and marched out of the kitchen. Even followed slower, his footsteps heavy. I stayed in that pantry until I heard the stairs creak under their weight and the murmur of their voices fade down the hall. My legs shook when I stepped out. Part age, part the adrenaline that had been buzzing through me since the front door opened. In that little span of time, with my back pressed against canned tomatoes and flour, the last fragile hope I had that this was all some misunderstanding shriveled up. My son wasn't the architect of this mess, but he was no longer just a bystander either. He was standing there, watching his wife build the gallows, and holding the hammer when she needed it. I slipped out the way I came in, through the mudroom, the shed, the sagging fence. The night air hit my face like a blessing. Back at the motel, I called Miss Klein as soon as I shut the door behind me. "Did you get it planted?" she asked. "Both," I said. "Office and kitchen." And Klein. I told her everything I'd heard. The Apex plan, the LLC, the forged medical statement. By the time I finished, her breathing was tight on the other end. "That's more than enough to start connecting dots," she said. "Give the bug a few hours. I'll text you when the feed goes live." I sat on the bed, still in my dark sweater, shoes kicked off but adrenaline keeping me upright. My phone buzzed around midnight. A link, a password. I clicked and suddenly I was back in my kitchen. Only this time I could see the waveform squiggling on the screen as voices came through. "So you'll call her in the morning," Lena was saying. "Tell her it's just for insurance. Old people are terrified of medical bills. Use that." "I hate this," Even muttered. "Then hate it on the balcony in Cabo," she replied. "After she signs." I listened until their voices blended into the static of late-night TV. Finally, Klein's name flashed across my screen with a new message. "Good," it read. "Let her push for a signature. That's where we catch her." I stared at those words, feeling something harden inside me. Just then, another message popped up. This one from Evan. "Mom," it said, "Lena wants to come see you tomorrow with some papers. Please, just sign so we can move forward." I set the phone down on the motel nightstand, its screen glowing in the dark, and lay back on the lumpy mattress. My son thought I was cornered. He had no idea who was really holding the net now. Miss Klein's office always smelled faintly of lemon oil and dry paper, like a library that had decided to go to college. That morning, sunlight slanted through the blinds in thin bars, striping the wall calendar behind her desk. Red circles marked dates I hadn't known meant anything to me. Apex site visit. County filing deadline. Scroll window. She tapped one of them with the end of her pen. They told their investors the property would be clear by next Saturday. That's their clock. Ours is shorter. I sat in the leather chair opposite her, my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee I barely tasted. On her desk between us lay the trust binder, open to the page with my name. It looked more solid here under her office lights than it had on the bedspread at the Prairie Inn. "So what do we do?" I asked. "Besides hide in motels and listen to them plan my funeral." Her mouth twitched. "We stop being surprised," she said. "We get ahead of them." She uncapped her pen and drew 3 numbers on a yellow pad. 1, 2, 3. "First, money," she said. "You told me you've been sending Evan transfers every month." "Little bailouts," I nodded, heat creeping up my neck. "Ever since he left for the city, there was always some emergency. Rent, car trouble, a deal that needed just one more push." I thought I was helping. "You were subsidizing his denial," she said, not unkindly. "That stops today." She pulled a form from her drawer. "We'll open a new account in your name only at the credit union across town. Pension and Social Security get rerouted there. No more automatic transfers to Evan, no more payments Lena can help you with. If they want money, they can't get it from you by accident." I thought of Evan's face in the kitchen, pale under Lena's words about debts and default. Cutting him off felt like pushing a man off a sinking boat. But then I remembered Riverside's buzzing lights and the way Lena had held out her hand for my wallet like she was picking up litter. "All right," I said quietly. "No more." "Second," she continued. "Title." She turned the binder around so I could read the bold heading Trustee Affidavit. "We're filing this at the county today. It's called a Notice of Interest. It tells anyone doing a title search that the Harold Bennett Family Trust holds legal interest in the ranch, with you as sole trustee. It doesn't change anything you and Harold set up. It just makes the invisible structure visible to the outside world." Lena said she checked all our papers. I murmured. "Didn't find anything." "That was because the trust didn't need to be on file when Harold set it up," Ms. Klein said. "But right now, with them calling mortgage brokers and lining up buyers, it's time to hang a sign on the courthouse wall that says, 'You can't buy what isn't theirs.'" She slid a pen toward me. The affidavit had a space for my signature, my hand steady now as I signed. This time, the letters were neat and clear. Martha Elaine Bennett. No room for confusion. And third, she said, capping the pen with a little click, "We set the trap." I looked at her. "Trap? You heard Lena last night," she said. "She's planning to show up with papers. Insurance forms, benefit assignments, whatever she thinks will scare you enough to sign. She needs something to wave under a banker's nose that makes it look like you've willingly stepped aside. We let her bring it. We let her lie. And we make sure we can prove it. I shifted in my chair. You want me to sign? I want you to play the part they've written for you, she said. Confused, overwhelmed, trusting. But you won't sign as the trustee whose name is on the trust. You'll sign as someone who doesn't exist legally in that chain. Wrong middle initial. Maiden name. You spill coffee on half the page if you need to. Enough to make any honest reviewer pause. And while she's pressing you, while she's telling you how this is all for your own good, that little recorder in your purse will catch every word. A sour taste rose in my mouth. Feels like letting her harm herself. She's already doing that, Ms. Klein said flatly. We're just not jumping in front of the bullet. You said you didn't want to live the rest of your life hiding. This is how we step into the open. I hesitated, then said the thing that had sat on my chest since the pantry. I don't want my boy in handcuffs, I admitted. Just her. She leaned back, steepling her fingers. Martha, conspirators don't get to claim innocence because they weren't holding the pen, she said. But judges do see nuance. They see who drove, who planned, who threatened. Evan's choices are on him. So are Lena's. You're not putting cuffs on anyone. You're just turning on the light. I closed my eyes for a moment. In the darkness, I saw Evan as he'd been at 10, trying to push a wheelbarrow half his size and tipping it over, laughing as grain spilled everywhere. Then I saw him at 35, staring at Lena's forged papers and not walking away. All right, I said again. Let's turn on the light. Lena didn't text before she came. She just showed up at the Prairie Inn late the next morning, her SUV nosing into the cracked parking lot like a yacht docking in the wrong harbor. From my window, I watched her climb out, nose wrinkling at the sight of the faded paint and crooked room numbers. She wasn't alone. A woman in pastel scrubs got out of the passenger side, clutching a clipboard, and behind them, a man in a tie so wide it looked borrowed carried a black briefcase. I sat back on the bed, slipped the small recorder into my purse, and let my shoulders sag. By the time the knock came, I'd arranged my face into the same bewildered expression I'd worn under Riverside's lights. I opened the door slowly. Oh, Martha, Lena said, sweeping a glance around the room behind me. This is where you've been staying. It's depressing. No wonder you're not yourself. I like the quiet, I said. Who are your friends? This is Nurse Kelly, she said, indicating the woman in scrubs. She's from Riverside's outreach team. And this, she gestured to the man, is Mr. Dean. He's a notary. We wanted to bring everyone here to make it easy on you. You don't even have to drive. They brushed past me, as if I'd invited them. Nurse Kelly smiled in that trained, empathetic way they must teach in orientation. Mr. Dean looked around for a flat surface and settled on the little round table by the window, opening his briefcase with a snap. We just have a few forms to clean up, Lena said, pulling out a neat stack of papers. Since you wandered off from Riverside, there were some issues with the intake. We want to make sure you're protected, okay? She laid the first page in front of me. At the top, in big, friendly letters, it said, Healthcare Directive and Benefit Assignment. Below, in denser type, phrases jumped out like teeth: irrevocable transfer, beneficial interest, successor representative. I slid my glasses down my nose. This looks complicated, I murmured. Nurse Kelly stepped closer. It's really just saying that Lena Evan can help make decisions for you, she said, voice calm and sweet. If you get confused, it ensures the facility can accept your benefits without delay. Lena nodded vigorously. Exactly. See, Mom, this is what love looks like: paperwork. We're protecting you. Without this, the state could seize everything if you get sick. Her words lodged in the recorder hidden in my purse like they'd lodged in my ears. What's this word? I asked, pointing to quitclaim, buried in the middle paragraph. I let my finger tremble. She put her hand over mine, steering it away. Legal mumbo-jumbo, she said briskly. It just means we can handle the boring stuff. You don't need to worry your head about that. Mr. Dean cleared his throat. If you could just sign at the bottom, Mrs. Bennett, he said, tapping the line. And date here. I'll witness. I should make some coffee. I said suddenly. My mouth is dry. Would you like some? Lena glanced around at the dingy coffee maker, the plastic-wrapped styrofoam cups. We're fine, she said shortly. Let's just get this done. I moved slowly to the little machine anyway, measuring scoops with hands that shook more from the weight of what I was about to do than from age. My back was to them, but I could feel their impatience like heat on my neck. Mrs. Bennet, Mr. Dean said again. Whenever you're ready. I turned, purse on my arm, the recorder inside humming silently. I set a cup of thin, bitter coffee on the table and sat down. The paper in front of me looked enormous. My name, Martha E. Bennet, was already neatly typed in the grantor line. I picked up the pen. My hand hovered over the signature line. Oh, I said, jerking my wrist just enough. The cup tipped, brown liquid sloshing across the bottom third of the page. It soaked into the notary block, blurring his printed name and the date. God, Martha. Lena snapped, snatching napkins from the holder and pressing them to the paper. You clumsy. It's okay, Mr. Dean said quickly, dabbing at the edges. The signature line's dry. It's still valid as long as she signs clearly. I'm so sorry, I stammered, letting my cheeks flush. My hands, they're not what they used to be. I adjusted my glasses, looked at the line one more time. Then, very carefully, I wrote, Martha E. Carver. A Carver. My maiden name. The one on my birth certificate, on an old high school diploma tucked in a box somewhere. Not the one on the trust, on the deed, on every piece of real property that mattered. The Bennet that followed, I let trail into an almost illegible scrawl. There, I said, handing the pen back. Mr. Dean blew gently on the ink, then affixed his stamp to the damp corner, the raised seal half wrinkled by the moisture. Lena snatched the paper up before it fully dried, flipping through to make sure the other pages were unblemished. Perfect, she said, her smile tight but triumphant. See, that wasn't so hard. We'll take it from here, Mom. You just stay put this time, okay? We'll have Riverside hold your room. She kissed the air near my cheek, already turning toward the door. Thank you for understanding. She tossed over her shoulder. You won't regret this. When the door closed behind them, the room seemed to swell with their absence. I sat very still for a moment, listening to the distant rumble of the SUV as it pulled away. Then I reached into my purse, clicked off the recorder, and exhaled a breath I felt like I'd been holding for days. 10 minutes later, there was another knock. This one softer, more rhythmic. Miss Klein slipped inside, her gaze immediately going to the damp ring on the table, the scattered napkins, the empty paper cup. Did she? She asked. I handed her the recorder and the phone where I'd snapped a quick photo of the signed page while Lena was bullying the notary. The image showed the coffee stain, the smeared notary block, and my looping, Carver. She did, I said. You were right. She couldn't resist. Ms. Klein studied the photo, then smiled, a slow, dangerous expression I'd never seen on her before. You said you were a poor old widow, Martha, she said. Turns out you're the most dangerous person in this valley. I just let her do what she does, I replied.
Lie. And now?
She said, slipping the recorder into her bag. We have her doing it on tape, with a defective instrument to wave in front of any judge who wants to see intent. I sat back, a strange combination of tiredness and satisfaction washing over me. Let her think she's got my signature, I said. She's signing her own sentence. That night, back on Ms. Klein's laptop screen, we watched the bug feed from my office pick up the sound of celebration. The waveform jumped as Lena's laughter filled the speakers. See, she was saying. Told you she'd cave. She signed. Once Apex's lawyers see this, they'll release the preliminary funds. And Frank gets his piece. Ivan's voice was quieter. Are you sure it's enough? The broker said there was something weird filed at the county today. Some notice. Lena dismissed it with a snort. Probably some clerical thing from when your dad died. We have an executed transfer now. Once the investor barbecue goes well and Stone sees the potential, he'll push his people to close fast. By this time next month, we'll be standing on that ridge watching bulldozers. Investor barbecue. Ms. Klein repeated, eyebrows rising. I listened as Lena laid out the plan. Grill on the lawn, Apex's man flying in with a preliminary agreement, a glossy pitch packet labeled, Lena McCoy Wellness and Golf Retreat, to hand out with ribs. She talked about sweetening the pot, with an extra slice for a private fund in Phoenix, money that would never touch a joint account. When the call ended, Ms. Klein shut the laptop slowly. "Well," she said, "she just invited all her victims to the same party." "And me?" I asked. "Oh, you'll be there," she said. "Not as the help behind the hedge this time. As the surprise main course." My mouth went dry. "You want me to show up? After they've told half the town I'm in a home somewhere drooling on myself?" "Yes," she said. "Because nothing spooks a skittish investor like realizing the woman they were told was out of the picture is very much alive, lucid, and holding a trust they never saw in the preliminary docs." She turned the laptop back toward her, fingers flying over the keys. "I'm sending Dahl's firm, the one representing Apex, a Corsi packet tonight. Trustee affidavit, a copy of the recording from your motel, a friendly note suggesting they run their own due diligence before they show up for barbecue." "And if they do?" I asked. "Then you stand there on your own land," she said, "and you tell the truth. Let Lena call you senile. Let her sneer. Every word she says will just make what we're about to show them hit harder." Her computer pinged. A new email popped up, subject line document upload notification. She clicked it, and we watched as a file appeared in Dahl's shared portal. Executed transfer of interest, Bennett Ranch. PDF. She opened it. The signature at the bottom was my name, neat and perfect, no coffee stain, no maiden mischief. "That's not the scan from the motel," I said, my stomach dropping. "No," she agreed, zooming in. "This is cleaner, crisper. See the pixelation around the curves. She lifted your signature from some older file, tax return maybe, and pasted it over the messy one. That, Martha, is forgery stacked on fraud." The room felt very quiet. "We've got her," she said softly. "Now we just need to let her serve herself up in front of the right people." Outside, the motel sign buzzed and flickered. Inside, the screen glowed with my stolen name. From prey to hunter, I thought. Harold would have liked that. "All right," I said, squaring my shoulders. "Let's plan my outfit for a barbecue." The morning of the barbecue, my ranch looked less like a working place and more like a magazine spread for people who don't know what mud feels like. They'd set up a huge white tent in the east meadow, right where Harold used to stack hay bales for the winter. Round tables with linen cloths and glittering glassware covered the grass. Vases of white flowers sat where old men had once parked themselves on upturned buckets. The cottonwoods along the creek were strung with fairy lights again, though the sun was bright enough that they looked like forgotten Christmas decorations. Up by the house, the driveway was lined with cars that probably cost more than I'd ever made in a year. Sleek black sedans, metallic silver SUVs, one low red thing with doors that opened like wings. This wasn't the normal trickle of pickups with dented fenders and feed sacks in the back. This was money rolling its wheels over my gravel. I stayed near the barn. Lena had texted the night before, all sweetness on the screen. "We're short on catering staff," she'd written. "Could you help with the smokers? Nobody does brisket like you." It'd mean the world to Evan. Miss Klein and I had read that message together in her office. Klein had just raised one eyebrow. "They always come back to the well," she'd said. "Say yes. But stay behind the hedge until it's time." So I put on my old work apron that morning, the one darkened by years of grease and smoke, and drove my truck up the back way like I was just any hired hand. No one stopped me. People see an old woman in an apron carrying a cooler, and they don't think, "Trustee." They think, "Cook." Behind the tent, they'd set up two big metal smokers on cinder blocks, their chimneys already sending up thin wisps of hickory-scented smoke. A young man from town, eyes glued to his phone, nodded at me as I set down my supplies. "Mrs. Bennett," he said. "Good to see you." "You too, Cody," I replied. "You trim this meat, or did they bring it prepped?" He shrugged. "Lady in charge said you'd know what to do." Lady in charge. That would be Lena. She appeared a few minutes later, heels sinking slightly into the soft ground, a phone to her ear, a binder under her arm. Her power dress was cream this time, sharp lines and a belt that could have doubled as a weapon. She pinched her nose as she approached. "God, that smell," she muttered. "You'd think you could at least move these things further from the guests. The wind is blowing it right into the tent." "That smell is why the meat tastes like something?" I said mildly, turning a brisket. You can't get flavor from a microwave, dear. She forced a tense smile. Just stay back here, okay? Let the professionals handle the front. Investors don't need to chat with the kitchen staff. Just keep the food coming when we send someone. Kitchen staff. I nodded like I hadn't owned this land before she'd ever set foot on it. I'll do what I do, I said. She was already walking away, barking orders at the rental staff about table placements and centerpieces. I watched her for a moment, then turned my attention to the smoker. There's something grounding about tending meat over low heat. The hiss of fat hitting hot metal, the slow transformation of tough muscle into something tender. It gives your hands a job while your mind lines up its own cuts. From my spot near the barn, hidden from the main tent by a row of tall shrubs, I could hear voices drifting over with the wind. Men's laughter, the clink of ice in glasses, the high, practiced trills of women commenting on the view. Once we flattened that eyesore of a barn, a man was saying, "You'll have a clear line from the clubhouse down to the 9th green. Spectacular sightline." I gripped the tongs a little tighter. A smoother voice answered, the kind that had talked people out of things for decades. "And the grave plot. You mentioned a family cemetery on site. That little hill." Another man replied, "We'll repurpose it. Spa overlook, maybe. People pay good money to meditate with a view of history." My jaw clenched so hard I heard something in my neck pop. History. That was what they were calling my husband's grave now. A selling point. A backdrop for cucumber water and hot stones. "Is that Dahl?" I asked quietly. Cody glanced up from his phone. "Guy from Apex," he said. "Yeah, that's him. Flew in this morning. Rented the Blacktown car. Big deal." "Supposedly. Big deal." The man who thought he was about to buy my life like a line item. Avon passed by the edge of my sightline carrying a tray of drinks, his tie already askew. He laughed too loudly at something Dahl said, the sound thin and brittle. His eyes darted once toward the barn, then away as if he couldn't quite bring himself to look where I might be. I listened as Dahl's conversation drifted closer. "And what about Mrs. Bennett?" he asked. "The original owner's widow. I saw her name in some older documents." Lena's laugh chimed out, brittle crystal over steel. "Oh, Martha," she said. "She's in a care facility. Early onset. We handle everything now. She loves it there. Bingo 3 times a week." I flipped a brisket, watched the juice bead on the surface like sweat. That was my cue. I loaded the first platter with thick slices of meat, arranging them the way Harold had taught me. Burnt ends tucked to one side for the folks who knew what they were asking for. I wiped my hands on my apron, picked up the heavy tray, and walked out from behind the privacy of the shrubs into the open. The lawn fell quiet for a heartbeat when people noticed me. It's funny how a leather apron and smoke on your clothes can stop conversations faster than a siren. Investors in tasteful blazers turned to stare, eyes flicking from my weathered face to the platter in my hands. A couple of women in pale summer dresses glanced down, making sure my boots didn't throw mud on their shoes. Lena saw me and went white around the mouth. "Mom," she hissed, striding toward me, the smile frozen on her lips. "What are you doing?" I kept walking, past her, straight to the long table where Dahl sat with his colleagues. I set the platter down in the center with a solid thud that made the silverware jump. "Thought your guests might like some meat with their promises," I said. Dahl looked up at me, then down at the food. He was in his late 50s, tan in a way that said golf course, not hayfield, his hair silvered just enough to suggest gravitas. His eyes, though, were sharp and tired. He'd seen things. Deals that went sideways, people who lied for smaller numbers than this. "This smells amazing," he said. "You cooked it?" "I did," I said, low and slow. "That's how you get the truth out of a tough cut." His mouth twitched. "Is that right?" I leaned in slightly, just enough that my words were for him, not the whole table. "Careful, sir," I said. "Some cuts seem tender until you hit the gristle. Especially on titles." Lena's hand clamped around my elbow like a vise. "Mother," she said, voice high and brittle. "You're confusing our guests. Why don't you go back to the kitchen? Mrs. Bennett gets mixed up sometimes. She likes to pretend she still lives here." A murmur rippled around the table. Dahl's eyebrows rose a fraction. "Is that so?" he asked. I turned my head slowly to look at him. "I sign what I understand," I said quietly. "And no one's explained anything to me in a way my Harold would approve of." He held my gaze a second longer, something like concern. Or calculation. Flickering behind his eyes. Then he looked at Lena. "My company doesn't buy into confusion, Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice mild but carrying. "We buy into clear title." Lena's laugh was thinner now. "Of course," she said. "Everything is in order. Evan and I have all the proper paperwork. Mom just gets overwhelmed. You know how it is at her age. She's in a care facility," Dahl said, as if confirming a fact. Lena swallowed. "She was," she said. "She came home for the event. We thought it would be nice for her to see before." "Before you tear it all down," I finished silently. I straightened, pulling my arm gently out of her grasp. "Enjoy your meal," I said to Dahl. "My husband didn't bleed into this soil so somebody could pave over his name. But I suppose everyone has to eat." Then I walked away. Not fast. Not like I was being chased off. I walked with my head up, back to the smokers, my apron flapping around my knees like a flag. Behind me, conversations picked up again, but the tone had shifted. There was a different weight to the murmurs now, a different angle to Dahl's questions. I caught snatches as I tended the fire. "You said she was out of the picture. County filing we didn't see in the original packet. Who is Klein again? Get me everything she's filed." Even buzzed around like a nervous fly, pouring more drinks than anyone needed, his laughter fraying at the edges. He didn't come near the barn. By late afternoon, the plates were empty, the glasses sweating in the heat. Dahl stepped away from the table, phone pressed to his ear, pacing a little distance from the tent where the music from a hired jazz trio tangled with the wind. "Yes, run it again," he was saying, his voice low but sharp. "Search for trusts, affidavits, anything new in the last week, and look at that transfer they emailed yesterday. Something's off." I smiled to myself and flipped another brisket. By evening, the fancy cars began to roll back down the drive, their drivers' faces carefully neutral. Dahl's black sedan left earlier than scheduled. He didn't shake Evan's hand as warmly when he went. I drove back to the motel in the blue light of dusk, the smell of smoke still in my hair. In room 6, the TV flickered, ignored. My focus was on the laptop screen Ms. Klein had set up on the small table. The bug in my office picked up Dahl's voice again, this time filtered through speakerphone. "Yes, we received a notice of interest from a Harold Bennett family trust," one of his lawyers was saying. "Filed by a Martha Bennett, trustee. That's number 1. Number 2? Dahl asked. "The affidavit your sellers sent over today, the one with her signature." The lawyer continued. "Our forensic team doesn't like it. The signature looks too perfect, identical to the one on a 3-year-old tax return we pulled from public records. Pixelation suggests it was digitally lifted and overlaid. Forged," Dahl said flatly. "Strongly suggests that yes." "And title?" he asked. "The trust holds it," the lawyer replied. "Not Evan Carter personally. His interest is, at best, unclear." There was a long pause. On the feed, I could hear the quiet hum of Dahl's office. "We're not closing on stolen land," he said finally. "Put everything on hold. And keep listening." Late that night, the bug picked up a different tone back at the ranch. Lena's shriek cut through the quiet like a wild animal caught in a trap. "That stupid old woman just cost us everything," she screamed. "Do you understand? Dahl's lawyers are poking around. They found something with her name on it, and that witch Klein's." Ivan's voice was smaller. "Maybe we can explain." "Explain what?" she snapped. "That we lied. That we forged her signature. If we don't fix this, we don't just lose the deal, Evan, we go under. Do you understand? The bank, the contractors, Frank and Phoenix, they're all coming. Find her. We need her to sign again. Clean this time. Or we're done." I sat on the motel bed, the laptop's glow painting the room in cold light, listening to my daughter-in-law realize the ground she'd been dancing on all week wasn't solid after all. Somewhere in a glossy high-rise, Dahl's counsel was drafting an email. A few minutes later, Ms. Klein's inbox pinged on her phone where it sat on the table between us. She picked it up, read, and smiled slowly. "They want to meet the actual trustee of the Bennett Ranch," she said. "First thing Monday." I reached over and turned down the volume on the laptop. For the first time in days, the motel room was truly quiet. "Then I suppose," I said, "I should find a clean blouse." The law office where it all came to a head couldn't have been farther, in feel from my kitchen table, but the stakes were the same: my home, my life, my son. The building was all glass and steel, the kind of place where people wear watches that cost as much as used cars. The receptionist on the 14th floor had a headset, perfect makeup, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She asked for my name, then did a tiny double take when I said, "Martha Bennett," like she recognized it from a memo. "They're expecting you," she said. "Conference room A down the hall." Then Ms. Klein walked beside me, her briefcase swinging lightly. I'd put on my best blouse, the blue one with the small white buttons, and pressed slacks that still smelled faintly of cedar from the closet. Harold's wedding band sat where it always had, a small circle of gold on my finger. I'd straightened my back before I stepped out of the elevator and hadn't let it bend since. When we walked into the conference room, everyone was already there. A long mahogany table ran down the center, surrounded by high-backed leather chairs. Mr. Dahl sat at the far end with two lawyers flanking him, papers neatly stacked in front of them. Across from them, on the opposite side, were Evan and Lena. Evan looked like he hadn't slept. Dark crescents under his eyes, tie knotted too tight, fingers worrying the edge of his legal pad until it curled. Lena, on the other hand, was polished within an inch of her life. Sharp black suit, red lipstick, hair pulled back so tight it seemed to lift her eyebrows. If it weren't for the slight twitch at the corner of her jaw, you'd have thought she was heading into a normal business negotiation. Two men in plain clothes sat unobtrusively against the wall, near the door. They wore sport coats and open collars, but their posture and the badges clipped to their belts gave them away. "Detectives, Mrs. Bennett," Dahl said as we entered, standing up. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Dahl," I replied, taking the chair Ms. Klein indicated, across from him, a little ways down. Klein took the seat beside me, laying her briefcase on the table with a quiet thump. Lena didn't wait for introductions. "This is absurd," she said, leaning forward, nails tapping on the polished wood. "Dragging my elderly mother-in-law into downtown like this. She gets confused. She shouldn't be put under this kind of stress." "Good morning to you too, Lena," I said dryly. She shot me a warning look, then turned to Dahl. "Wa could have handled any questions through email. Instead, your lawyers went behind our backs and stirred up some small-town attorney who's trying to make a name for herself." Ms. Klein smiled faintly. "I've had my name for quite some time," she said. "And my concern isn't your stress level, Mrs. Carter. It's my client's property rights." "You mean your client's paranoia?" Lena snapped. "Martha has been struggling since Harold died. We were just trying to help her transition. Any mix-ups with paperwork were compassionate efforts to shoulder responsibility, not crimes." "Let's talk about that paperwork," Dahl's lead lawyer said, cutting in. He stood and walked to a panel on the wall. With a click, a projector whirred to life, and the far wall lit up with a split-screen image. On the left was the document Lena had hurried out of my motel room, coffee stain blooming across the bottom third, notary block blurred, my wobbly, Martha E. Carver, scrawled at the bottom. On the right was a much cleaner version. Same heading, same paragraphs, but bright white, crisp black text. And at the bottom, my name in a neat, confident signature I recognized from tax returns and checks I'd written in another life. Martha E. Bennett. "As you can see," the lawyer said, laser pointer dot circling the left page, "this is the instrument executed at the Prairie Inn last Thursday. Coffee damage, irregular signature, questionable notarization." He shifted the beam to the right. "This is the clean version emailed to our due diligence portal later that day. Note the lack of coffee staining and the identical signature curve, for curve to Mrs. Bennett's 3-year-old 1040 filing, which is a matter of public record. Our forensic consultant has concluded, with a high degree of certainty, that this signature was digitally lifted and pasted onto a new document. In short, forgery." Lena's face drained of color, then flooded red. "That is ridiculous," she hissed. "There must have been a scanning error. Or your people modified it for clarity. We never." "You didn't just try to evict a widow, Mrs. Carter," Ms. Klein said, her voice calm but cutting through Lena's like a knife. "You tried to erase a trustee. Big difference. Legally." She opened her briefcase and pulled out the trust binder, sliding it to the center of the table. "This," she said, opening to the key page, "is the Harold Bennett Family Trust, executed and funded before Harold's passing. Clause 4, subsection 3, if you'll indulge me. She read aloud, clear and steady. Upon the death of the grantor, all right, title, and interest in the real property known as Bennett Ranch, parcel ID 4799213, shall vest in the trust to be held and managed by the trustee, Martha Lane Bennett. No heir including but not limited to the grantor's son, Evan Harold Bennett, shall acquire any direct ownership interest in the real property absent explicit written amendment by the trustee. She closed the binder with a soft thud. In plain English, the ranch belongs to the trust. The trust belongs under Martha's control. Evan had at most a hope, not a share. Dal's lawyer nodded. Our independent title search confirms that, he said. The trust is on file now. Your son, Mrs. Carter, never had legal authority to sell. And you certainly didn't have the right to present yourself as owner to us. Lena's composure cracked. Well, we're advised. Be whom? One of the detectives asked, speaking for the first time. His voice was dry, like a man who'd heard every excuse twice already. She floundered. It was implied. The will leaves everything to Evan. The deed had their names, Harold and Martha, so obviously. Obviously, Ms. Klein said. You didn't bother to ask an actual lawyer. Or you did, and you didn't like the answer. The other detective stood. Let's lay it out, he said, pulling a small notebook from his jacket. We have attempted wire fraud. In the form of an executed contract for sale of property you didn't own, based on forged supporting documents. We have forgery in the doctored transfer you sent to Apex Golf Group. We have elder financial exploitation in your efforts to procure Mrs. Bennett's signature under false pretenses while she was being moved to a state home she neither chose nor consented to. He glanced at his partner. Am I missing anything? Conspiracy. If her husband here knew about it and participated. The other replied, jerking his chin toward Evan. And possibly bank fraud, depending on how those mortgages were applied for. Evan looked like he'd been turned to stone. His gaze flicked from the screen to the trust binder to my face. It was as if he was seeing it all at once for the first time. The coffee he'd never asked about. The way I'd said Harold handled the papers. The quiet visits to Ms. Klein's office over the years. Wait, he said hoarsely. Conspiracy. I didn't forge anything. You just told me to do what needed to be done. Lena snapped, turning on him so fast her chair squealed. You're the one who wanted her out. It was your idea to move her early. Your idea to talk to the bank behind her back. He flinched as if she'd slapped him. We talked about options. He stammered. I never told you to fake her signature. The transfer of beneficial interest you sent us. Dahl's lawyer cut in, ignoring their spat. Includes a side agreement. A consulting fee for $5 million, routed to an account in the name of L.M. McCoy Holdings. Care to explain that, Mrs. Carter? Lena's mouth opened and closed. That's industry standard, she said weakly. A developer's commission. I did the legwork. Negotiations. It was only fair. Ivan's head snapped toward her. $5 million, he croaked. You told me the sale was for 10, not 15. You said we were splitting. Mr. Dahl. I said. Speaking over their rising voices. You really want to do business with people who can't even tell each other the whole truth. Dahl looked at me then, really looked. For all his tan and tailored suit. There was something in his eyes that said he'd grown up in a place where people took off their hats when they walked into church. We don't do business on stolen land, Mrs. Bennett, he said. And we don't do business with forgers. He turned to Lena and Evan, his expression gone flat. Apex Golf Group is withdrawing from any and all negotiations regarding Bennett Ranch, he said. Our lawyers will be filing a formal complaint with the state licensing board about your conduct, Mrs. Carter. Any funds advanced under the preliminary agreement will be clawed back. You can't do that. Lena spat. We had a deal. We had a proposed transaction predicated on fraudulent representations, Dahl said coolly. It's dead. I suggest you focus on your other problems. He gathered his papers, nodded once to me, and walked out, his lawyers following. The door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded louder than any slam. For a moment there was silence, the kind that hums in your ears. Then the detective who'd been taking notes stepped forward, a pair of handcuffs glinting in his hand. Lena McCoy Carter, he said, his voice taking on that bored, formal cadence I'd heard once on a true crime show. You're under arrest for attempted wire fraud, forgery, and exploitation of a vulnerable adult, among other things. You have the right to remain silent. She lurched to her feet. This is insane, she shrieked. You can't just even tell them? Tell them you signed off on everything, that this was your idea. He half rose, an old instinct to shield her kicking in. Then Dahl's words about the consulting fee, the $5 million she'd tried to skim, seemed to hit him in the gut. He froze halfway between sitting and standing. You were going to leave me, he whispered, horror dawning. Weren't you? Take the money and go. She twisted toward him, eyes wild. Of course I wasn't. The detective didn't give her time to spin another story. He took her by the wrist, turning her around with a practiced movement. The snick of metal closing around her was softer than I'd imagined, but it cut through me all the same. You thought she was an easy mark, the other detective said, nodding toward me. Turns out she was the only adult in the room. Lena struggled, heels scraping on the polished floor. You're not even sick, she flung at me. You walked out of that home like you were going to the store. You played me. I survived you, I said quietly. There's a difference. They led her out, her protests fading down the hall. When the door closed, the room seemed to exhale. Dahl's empty chair sat at the head of the table, the projector's light still painting the wall with my stolen signature, and the coffee stain that had given us the opening we needed. The younger of the detectives cleared his throat. Mrs. Bennett, he said, we're going to need a full statement. Timeline, copies of those recordings your attorney mentioned, everything. As for your son, he looked at Evan, who had sunk back into his chair, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. He hasn't been charged yet. The detective continued. His level of cooperation from this point on will factor into whether he sees the inside of a cell or just a lot of very unpleasant meetings with lawyers and creditors. Ivan didn't respond. His shoulders shook once, like he'd been hit by a wave. He didn't cry exactly, but the sound that came out of him wasn't far from it. I'll answer your questions, I told the detective. You'll have everything you need. But my son and I have another talk to finish. The detective nodded, closing his notebook. We'll give you a minute, he said. He and his partner gathered their things and stepped out, leaving the door ajar. Miss Klein started organizing her papers, giving us space but staying put, a steady presence at my side. I turned in my chair to face Evan. He finally looked at me. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, his eyes really met mine. No glancing away, no phone between us, no Lena filling the space with her voice. Just my boy, older and hollowed out, looking at his mother the way a man looks at a cliff he's just fallen off. You wanted to be master of this ranch, I said softly. To stand on the ridge and look down at what you'd built, or sold, and feel like a big man. His throat worked. He nodded once, a jerky movement. I went on. You saw what that truly costs. Not numbers on a screen. Not golf courses and spaz people. Trust, your father's name. My home, your own dignity. He swallowed hard, eyes glistening. I never meant for it to go this far, he whispered. I thought it was just a way to get ahead. To finally give you something back. By taking everything first, I asked. He flinched. There's no ranch for you to sell, Ivan, I said, not unkindly. Not now. Not ever, unless I say so. But if you want a spot on that land, any spot, you're going to have to earn it the way your father did. He blinked. With a shovel, I said. And a back that hurts at night for the right reasons. Outside the glass walls, the city hummed along oblivious. Inside, in that polished room, my son sat between the wreckage of his plans and the faint outline of a different future. One that didn't start with easy money. Whether he'd take it or not, that was a choice still hanging in the air between us. 6 months after the day the handcuffs clicked shut, autumn came to the ranch the way it always had. Quietly, then all at once. The cottonwoods along the creek turned gold, leaves rattling like coins in the breeze before letting go. The mornings came crisp and thin, my breath puffing white when I stepped out onto the porch with my first cup of coffee. The air smelled of dry grass and wood smoke, not bleach and boiled cabbage. Life had settled into a new shape, different, but recognizably mine. I walked the familiar path from the house past the barn, my boots scuffing through drifts of fallen leaves. The fences along the north pasture ran straight and true now. The rotten posts Harold had been meaning to get to, finally replaced. The barn wore a fresh coat of red paint, the flaking old boards sealed and proud again. Inside the house, Lena's improvements were gone. The gaudy chandelier she'd installed in the dining room, which always looked like it belonged in a Vegas hotel, not over my scratched pine table, now sat in pieces in a box in the attic. The abstract art was down. Harold's bull photograph was back where it belonged. Family photos I'd quietly boxed up during the worst of it were back on the mantel, Evan with missing front teeth, Harold holding up a string of trout, my parents on their 50th anniversary, all watching over the room like they had something to say about how it turned out. Out in the south pasture, near the line of poplars, I spotted him. Evan wore a faded work shirt and jeans that had known more dirt than boardrooms these days. Sweat darkened the back of his collar. He was digging a post hole, the post hole digger biting into the ground with a satisfying thunk each time he drove it down. His motions were awkward at first, then steadier. A pile of replaced posts leaned nearby, each one with a fresh coat of preservative, ready to go into the earth. His hands, when he straightened to wipe his forehead, were calloused now. Not in the way of someone who swings a golf club on weekends, but in the way of a man who has wrestled wire and wood for hours. He'd lost some of the softness around his middle, too. Hard work has its own kind of diet. He saw me and lifted a hand in greeting, chest still rising and falling heavy. I nodded back, then turned up toward the small hill at the back of the property where the family plot sat. Lena's legal mess had played out fast and ugly. Between the recordings, the forged affidavit, and the paper trail of that $5 million consulting fee, the prosecutors hadn't had to work hard. She took a plea when she realized no one, Apex, Frank and Phoenix, not even Evan, was going to throw themselves under the bus for her. Last I heard, she was trading her power suits for a jumpsuit, awaiting transfer to a minimum security facility 2 hours away. Evan had sat in that courtroom, jaw clenched, as the judge read out the charges and the sentence. When it was over, he'd walked out with no wife, no house, no car, and a credit score that might as well have been a ghost story. But he walked out free. His cooperation had meant the difference between being labeled the architect of the scheme and its weak accomplice. After the dust settled, I gave him a choice. You can go, I told him at my kitchen table, the same one where Harold and I had once counted feed bills. Take whatever dignity you've got left and start over somewhere else. City, another town, doesn't matter. You'll have no money, no lines of credit, and no help from me. But it's a fresh slate. He'd looked down at his empty hands, then around the room as if seeing it for the first time as something other than an asset. And the other option? He asked. You stay, I said. Not as an owner, not as a guest, as hired help. Room and board in the old bunk room off the barn, where your father and I slept when the house was just studs and a dream. Minimum wage. You do what I tell you until you earn the right to decide for yourself. The bunk room, he'd repeated, horrified. With the mice. With the mice, I'd said. You made this bed, son. I'm just making sure you don't lie in it all day. He'd almost left. I could see it in the way he kept glancing at the door, at his phone, at the road. The first week, every blister on his hands was a reason to curse. The second, his back seized up after we moved a stack of feed sacks, and he stomped off behind the barn to swear where he thought I couldn't hear him. Twice he packed a bag. Twice he sat on the edge of that bunk room bed, staring at the wall, then unpacked it again. Little by little, the complaining quieted. He still grumbled, but there were days he'd come into the kitchen at dusk, collapse into a chair, and say, almost wonderingly, I am so tired. With something like satisfaction under the ache. I thought money and respect came from papers and titles. He told me one evening as we leaned on a newly set fence post, watching the sky turn pink. Turns out it comes from finishing a fence line straight. I didn't tell him about the changes I'd made to the trust right away. That was between me, Miss Klein, and Harold's memory for the time being. We added a clause, tucked into the back where only someone looking for it would find it. It said that if Evan worked the ranch responsibly for 10 straight years, kept the books in the black, maintained the land, treated the place as a living thing instead of a flip. He'd inherit a majority stake. Not all of it, but enough to make it his. If he ever tried to mortgage it to the hilt again, or sell it out from under himself for some shiny promise, the whole property would be liquidated and the proceeds donated to a foundation that helped seniors fight financial abuse and pay for decent care homes. That seems harsh, Ms. Klein had said when I proposed it. So is being dumped like trash at a facility you didn't choose. I'd replied. If he can't see the difference by then, someone else deserves this land more. Now, on that autumn day, I stood at Harold's grave with my hat in my hands. The stone was simple, just like he'd wanted. Harold Bennett, beloved husband and father. It read, with his dates and a tiny carved steer in the corner. I'd planted a rosebush there in the spring. It had taken to the soil well, its last few blooms clinging stubbornly in the chill. The land is still ours, love, I said softly. They didn't get it. Not the barn, not the house, not even the little hill they wanted to turn into a spa. And the boy. I looked down the slope. Avon was at the rose garden fence now. The one Harold built himself out of cedar so his flowers would have something worthy to lean on. A section had rotted and fallen last winter, taking some of Lena's expensive trellises with it. He was replacing it board by board, measuring twice, sinking each post by hand. The boy finally knows what dirt feels like under his nails. I finished. The wind lifted a strand of my hair, carrying the smell of turned earth and sawdust. I put my hat back on and walked down toward the fence. Evan straightened as I approached, wiping his hands on his jeans. There was a smudge of soil on his cheek he hadn't noticed. Looks good, I said, tapping one of the new boards. It didn't wobble. Not as straight as Dad's, he said. But I'm getting there. We stood side by side for a moment, looking at the roses gearing up to sleep through winter. Mum, he said suddenly, voice rough. I never thanked you. For what? I asked. For not letting me get away with what we did, he said. And not throwing me away altogether after. You could have. Most people would have. I thought about that. About how easy it would have been, in some ways, to sell, to downsize, to leave this land and its ghosts behind. To send Evan a letter someday from a condo in town saying, I hope you're well, and nothing more. I didn't do it for you, I said. Not at first. I did it for your father. For the promise I made him. And for myself. Because I'm not done living just because you and your wife decided I was in the way. He nodded, eyes on the ground. I believed her, he said quietly. Lena, when she said you were stuck in the past, that you didn't understand money or opportunity, that we were rescuing you, somehow. It sounds so stupid now, but at the time it felt good to be the one doing the rescuing. I finished for him. He huffed out a humorless laugh. Yeah, turns out I was the one who needed saving. From myself. He looked up at me then, and for a heartbeat I saw the little boy who used to run across this yard with his shoelaces untied and his hair sticking up, arms outstretched for balance. I sleep better now, he said. After a day like this. I used to lie awake in the city, even on good days. Deals signed, bonuses paid. I still felt wrong. Now I fall into bed and my back aches and my hands burn, and I'm out in 20 seconds. It feels honest. I patted his shoulder once, then picked up a stray board and leaned it against the fence. I can't give you a backbone, Ivan, I said. Nobody can. You have to grow it yourself. All I can do is stop cushioning every fall so you finally learn how to stand. He nodded slowly. I get that now, he said, as the sun slipped lower, painting the ranch in that golden light that made Harold call it, or cathedral. I thought about how close I'd come to losing all of it. Not just the land, but the chance to see my son become something other than a cautionary tale. At 72, I learned that love without boundaries isn't kindness. It's neglect in a prettier dress. Every time I paid off a credit card or wired money with no questions, I thought I was helping my boy. Really, I was helping him stay exactly the kind of man wolves like Lena look for. The ranch is safe for now. If Evan keeps walking the path he's on, it might be his one day in truth, not just in his fantasies. If he stumbles back toward old habits, well, the papers in Ms. Klein's safe will make sure this land goes to people who know what it means to be discarded. Either way, the Bennett Ranch won't end its story under asphalt. If you've listened this far, You might be wondering what you'd do in my boots. If your own child tried to trick you out of your home and land, would you take them to court, like I effectively did? Or would you walk away and start over somewhere else? Leave them to drown in their own choices? Do you believe blood alone makes someone family, or is it how they treat you when they think you're weak? Has anyone ever tried to control your money, property, or decisions just because of your age? Have you ever realized, the way I did, that helping someone financially was actually keeping them from growing up? I'd like to hear your stories, especially if you're an older listener, thinking about wills and trusts and who you can really trust. Tell me in the comments what you would have done with a son like mine, with a ranch like this. And whether you're listening from a small town, a farm, or a big city apartment, ask yourself, where is your line? When does protecting your family mean saying no instead of yes? If you want to hear more stories like mine, old folks who refuse to go quietly when greed comes knocking, stick around. There are a lot of us out here, and more than a few wolves who still think we're easy prey. Turns out, sometimes the sheep have teeth.